Nobody knows what you're carrying, and that's exactly how you want it. Not because you're hiding something, not because you're broken, but because somewhere along the way, you decided that your problems are yours to solve, quietly, alone, without making it anyone else's burden. That decision has a name, and it has consequences most men never examine. You wake up some mornings and there's this weight. It's not dramatic, it doesn't stop you from functioning. You still make coffee, still show up to work, still respond to texts, still ask how everyone else is doing. But underneath all of that, something is pulling at you. And you say nothing. Not to your partner, not to your friends, not to anyone. You file it away. You get on with it. And if someone asks if you're okay, you say you're fine. Because in your mind, you are fine, fine enough. Fine enough to keep moving. You've been doing this for so long, it doesn't even feel like a choice anymore. It just feels like who you are. You don't complain. You don't unload on people. You don't walk into a room and make your pain the centerpiece. When something goes wrong at work, you handle it. When the relationship gets hard, you absorb it. When the finances are tight, you figure it out. You are the one who holds things together. That's your role. That's what you do. And there's a kind of pride in that, a quiet dignity in being the man who doesn't fall apart. But here's what that pride costs you, and most men never add it up. There's a pattern that develops in men who handle everything alone. It starts early. Most men who suffer in silence learned before they were 20 years old that expressing pain created problems. Maybe it made people uncomfortable. Maybe it was dismissed. Maybe someone responded with impatience. Maybe the environment just made it clear that your struggle wasn't the priority. So you adapted. You learned to internalize. You learned to process privately. You learned to present as steady even when you weren't. And that adaptation worked. It kept things running. It kept you functional. It kept other people from worrying. But adaptations that work in one chapter of life don't always serve you in the next. Here's what happens to a man who never lets anything out. The emotions don't disappear, they compress. Think of it like pressure building in a system with no release valve. For a while, the system holds. It was built to hold. But pressure that has nowhere to go doesn't just vanish. It redirects. It comes out as irritability when you didn't expect it, as shutdown when someone tries to connect, as a dull flatness that you can't explain, as physical symptoms that don't have an obvious cause, as distance from people you actually care about. You're not angry, you're pressurized. And the thing that makes this harder is that men who suffer in silence are often the most capable men in the room. They're competent, they're reliable, they handle problems efficiently, they don't dramatize, they don't collapse. So nobody checks on them. People assume the strong one is fine, because the strong one always seems fine, because the strong one has conditioned everyone around him to believe that he doesn't need checking on. And so the cycle holds. You carry more, you show less. People ask less. You carry more. Here's what most men in this pattern never say out loud. It gets lonely, not socially, you might have people around you. But there's a specific kind of loneliness that comes from never being fully known, from being the person everyone leans on, but not being able to lean back, from sitting across from someone who loves you and still feeling completely unreachable. You don't talk about that. You don't even let yourself think about it very long, because thinking about it doesn't fix it, and you're not in the habit of sitting with things that don't have a solution. But the loneliness is real, and it compounds. Every time you say, I'm fine, when you're not, the gap widens slightly between who you are and who people think you are, between what you're carrying and what anyone around you knows about. After enough time, that gap starts to feel permanent. Like maybe that's just the way it is. Like maybe that's just who you are now. That is not who you are. That is a pattern. And patterns can shift. Understanding this isn't about becoming someone who processes emotion out loud in front of people who haven't earned it. That's not the ask. Men who suffer in silence don't need to become performatively vulnerable. That would be just as hollow as the silence. But there's a difference between privacy and isolation. Privacy is choosing who gets access to the real version of you. Isolation is deciding that nobody gets access. Privacy is intelligent. Isolation is costly. The men who navigate midlife well, not perfectly, but well, are not the ones who open up to everyone. They're the ones who have built one or two relationships where they don't have to perform, where they can say, "That was a hard week," without immediately following it with a joke, where they can say, "I don't know what I'm doing with this," without having to justify the confusion, where they can be in the middle of figuring something out without presenting a finished answer. That is not weakness. That is emotional economy. You're not wasting energy on performance. You're not pretending. You're directing your honesty toward the people who can actually receive it. That's a form of discernment, not vulnerability for its own sake. The men who suffer the most in silence are not the ones who lack strength. They're the ones who applied their strength to the wrong problem for too long. The strength it takes to hold everything in is real. The same strength, directed inward instead of outward, towards self-awareness instead of self-suppression, changes things. Not overnight, not dramatically, but it changes things. And here's the part that most men never get to. When you've spent decades being the one who holds it together, you start to believe that's all you are. The reliable one, the steady one, the one who handles it. But that's a role. It's not an identity. You are not required to perform strength for people who never asked you to carry this much in the first place. That weight you've been carrying? Some of it was never yours to begin with. You picked it up because nobody else would. You kept it because putting it down felt like quitting, and quitting was never something you allowed yourself to do. So you carried it another year, and another. And somewhere in there, it stopped feeling like a burden. It started feeling like proof. Proof that you were dependable. Proof that you could handle it. Proof that you were the kind of man who didn't need help. But here's what nobody tells you about carrying that much for that long. It changes your posture, not physically, psychologically. You start to move through life braced, always prepared for the next thing to manage, always scanning for the next problem to absorb. You stop expecting rest. You stop expecting ease. You start to believe that struggle is just the texture of your life. And that belief is the most expensive thing you own. If any part of this video landed with you, it's probably because you recognized yourself in it. Not as someone damaged, not as someone who needs fixing, as someone who developed a way of moving through the world that protected you and served others and cost you more than you've ever tallied up. The silence was never the problem. The silence was the solution to a different problem. The question worth sitting with is whether that solution still fits the life you're actually living now. You are not what you carry. You're not the weight of things you've never said. But you do deserve, at least occasionally, to set some of it down. Not for everyone. For the right person. In the right moment. On your terms. That's not losing who you are. That's deciding what carrying everything alone has actually cost you, and whether you're still willing to pay it.